Science in pajamas, doot doot. Alright, so today we are going to be talking about photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is a process that some organisms can do in order to get glucose. We've talked about glucose in past videos, like when we were talking about the cell and its organelles, or when we were talking about, when we were talking about like the biomolecule, But what we were saying is that glucose is needed for your cells in order to power them to provide energy. The mitochondria breaks the glucose apart, releasing energy from the bonds, and then stores that energy in the bonds of ATP, which can then go out and power all the different reactions and organelles of your cell. Now, some organisms, it's very clear how they get their glucose, like us. We get it from our diet. So when we eat food, we get glucose from that. And then we just send the glucose after, we've digested our food. We send it onto the mitochondria in our different cells. However, what about organisms that can't eat? Like a tree or flowers or things like that. Well, those organisms have to get glucose a different way, and that's where photosynthesis comes in. Now, photosynthesis occurs in an organelle called the chloroplast. We find it in plant cells, among other organisms, some protists, some bacteria. No, not bacteria, sorry. But yeah, just different things. Sorry, I'm a little out of it. I'm not quite sure why, but bear with me. Anyways, so let's start talking about photosynthesis, and let's especially start by talking about the chloroplast. So the chloroplast is a cell organelle that does photosynthesis. It has its own membrane. So it has the outer membrane and the inner membrane. And inside of it, it has these stacks. Now, obviously, I'm drawing them a little bit more on the messy side, like my hair. But the entire stack, is called a granum. But again, it's made up of these stacked discs, and one disc is called thylakoid. So the granum is a stack of these thylakoid discs. The inside has a jelly-like substance similar to cytoplasm, but not exactly the same. And that's called the stroma. And then oftentimes there will also be these pieces connecting granums, and these are called lamella. Alright. Now inside the thylakoid disc, there's a particular protein, a pigment called chlorophyll. This is what gives it its green color, and that's also what's used during photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is as we said, it's a chemical reaction. It occurs, part of it occurs in the thylakoids, and part of it occurs in the stroma. There are two steps. The first step, which is called the light-dependent reaction, occurs in the thylakoids. And the second step, the Kelvin reaction, occurs in the stroma. Let's talk a little bit about what needs to go into this reaction for us to run it. Now, a lot of us know some of the basics of plants. We know that they take in carbon dioxide. So, here's my happy little tree. It'll take in carbon dioxide and it'll absorb water from its roots. Now, this is actually very important because these are the two ingredients for photosynthesis to occur, the two reactants of it. Then it's the sunlight, which acts like a catalyst and triggers the reaction. So we have carbon dioxide plus water plus energy, in this case sunlight, and that'll give us, I will rewrite it as an actual chemical equation. That'll give us, we already said, the glucose, which is C6H12O6, and it'll also give another waste product, oxygen gas. Now, this is by no means a balanced equation. That's why I'm going to rewrite it. So carbon dioxide goes in, water goes in, oxygen gas is released. That's why plants are important. And the glucose will stay in the cells because once it's done being made, it's actually going to be sent to the mitochondria in order to run cellular respiration and provide energy for their cells. Now let's take a moment and rewrite the equation as a balanced equation. So we have 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water molecules in the presence of sunlight, because that's our energy. That's what's going to provide the catalyst to begin the reaction. These are our reactants. They're what we're starting with. We're starting with 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. When this reaction is activated by light, we will get 1 glucose molecule, C6H12O6, plus 6 oxygen gas molecules. So this is the reaction for photosynthesis. 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules. With sunlight, we have this energy that activates the reaction, will give us the products of 1 glucose, C6H12O6, so 1 glucose molecule plus 6 oxygen gas molecules. So that's the reaction. Now we're going to talk about the different parts of it, and then we'll kind of do a summary, and that'll be it. Hopefully, be a little more educated. All right. Now, as we said, It takes place in the chloroplast, and there are two parts: the light-dependent reaction and the Kelvin cycle. The light-dependent reaction occurs first. Now, this is actually going to take place in the thylakoid membrane. So we're going to have the thylakoid membrane. So this is the thylakoid membrane. This would be inside the thylakoid. This would be outside of it. Now there's a series of proteins inside or sticking through the membrane. So I'm going to start drawing some of those. Let's see. Now, is this exactly perfect? No. But hopefully it'll help you understand a little bit about this. And then at least provide you with a visual. So this is the thylakoid membrane. We have these particular proteins here. Now what happens is, let's see, which one do I want? There we go. Now what's going to happen is that the sunlight is going to hit this first protein. And that's actually going to energize it. It's going to energize it. Now the water's already been absorbed into the cell and has already been taken up by the chloroplast. So when the sunlight, hence light-dependent reaction, when the light energizes this first protein, it's actually going to cause the water molecules to break apart. You'll end up with O plus 2 hydrogen ions. Now it's those hydrogen ions that are going to be important in a little bit. But not just that. The reason why we have these hydrogen ions is because we take the electrons off of them. The electrons are sent into the protein, and they begin something called the electron transport chain. The electrons are going to be transferred and moved from one protein to the other, to the other, to another, to another. Now we'll get up to what they're up to in a moment. But as they move, as they get passed from one protein to another, it actually causes additional hydrogen ions to be brought across the membrane and into the thylakoid. That's actually very important that we do that because of the last step. Now, again, we're going to talk about what happens here in a moment. So what we're also doing, though, is inside here, inside the thylakoid, we are amassing a bunch of hydrogen ions. So this is going to allow us to accumulate a whole bunch of these hydrogen ions. And that's because of this guy right here. He plays a major role. This particular enzyme is called ATP synthase. ATP synthase. And what it does is it actually pulls the hydrogen ions through it and back out to the outside of the thylakoids. Now, once it does that, it's like if you've ever seen a water wheel. As the water moves down a river, it pushes on the water wheel spins, and as the water wheel spins, it generates energy. Well, that's kind of what this is. This higher concentration of the hydrogen ions forces them to go through the ATP synthase. Remember, when we were talking about diffusion and how different molecules naturally do not want to stay in a large group. They want to move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Well, we've lowered the concentration of hydrogen ions by dragging them across the membrane. That created a larger concentration inside and a smaller concentration outside. So now that we have this big concentration, it's going to cause the hydrogen ions to move through the ATP synthase in order to get to the area where there is a lower concentration. And as they move through that ATP synthase, it generates energy. And we're going to take that energy and we are going to put it onto, I'm going to have an ADP, adenosine diphosphate, plus another phosphate, and when the hydrogen moves through, it's going to generate energy that we're going to store in the ADP, which is going to cause it to form a bond with that phosphate, turning it into ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, when we form a bond between this lonely phosphate and ADP, we're storing the energy that we just created in that bond. So now we have adenosine triphosphate. Now let's come back to the electron transport chain. I wanted to start talking about this because we were talking about how the hydrogens were moving across. But now let's talk about the electron transport chain. As the electrons are moved, they can't just stop and stay there. We need to take them out of the electron transport chain. Otherwise, all those negative electrons would start repelling the ones that are trying to move. So we have to get rid of those electrons. We're going to have this particular molecule called NADP+. NADP+. And there are hydrogen ions out here. So when we attach, what these are going to do is they're going to grab the electrons. And when they grab the electrons, it allows them to bond, forming NADPH. Now, NADPH is a taxi cab for the electrons because they're actually going to be moved to the next stage of photosynthesis, to the Kelvin cycle, as is this energy. Both the energy and the electrons stored on NADPH, those are needed for the next step. We need them for the next step to occur. So this electron transport chain is a way for us to break apart the water in order to get the hydrogen, as well as release electrons from it. The electrons get picked up by NADP+, forming NADPH. The hydrogen gets sent through ATP synthase and generates energy so that we have ATP created. Now we have an energy source, a rechargeable battery, ATP, and we have NADPH with the electrons. And we are ready to take those and move them to the next step. All right, so this is the light-dependent reaction. And that brings us to step 2, the Kelvin cycle. Now the Kelvin cycle occurs in the stroma. That's, remember, the cytoplasm-like substance that fills up the space inside of the chloroplast. This is just going to take place inside of the stroma. Now, we're just going to kind of try and keep this as simple as possible because this part does get a little confusing. I'm not going to lie. Alright. Now it's called a cycle. So we're already going to have certain molecules in it. And this particular molecule is a 5-carbon molecule. So 5-carbon, C for carbon, molecule. It is already in the stroma. It is ready to be used. Now, this is where the carbon dioxide comes in. Remember, we said that carbon dioxide is one of the ingredients, the reactants we need for this reaction. So we need carbon dioxide to enter the reaction. Now, again, we're not going to get into all the super details of how things break apart and how they bond, but we're just going to keep it pretty straightforward and try and make it more simplified, especially since I just teach regular biology. This is not AP level video. Anyways, the carbon dioxide and the 5-carbon molecule are going to go through a process and they're going to bond to form a 6. I need to get my red. A 6-carbon molecule. All right. And then we are going to receive the energy from the ATP, and we are going to use it. Now, how we release the energy from the ATP is we break off that last phosphate, turning it back into ADP plus phosphate. We're also going to use the electrons at this point from NADPH. So NADPH. We're going to take the electrons off of that, and we're left with NADP plus. All right. Now that's going to provide energy as well as electrons, and that's going to allow us to break that 6-carbon molecule into 2 3-carbon molecules. Now, one of them is just going to hang out here for a little bit. The other one is going to continue on through the cycle so that it can be, well, recycled. Now, eventually, as we go through this multiple times, we're going to build up so that we have 5. So this has occurred several times. And we end up with the 5 3-carbon molecules. Well, what's going to happen at this point is we're going to break some bonds and rearrange them in order to create 3 5-carbon molecules. And now that we have 5-carbon molecules again, they can be recycled and used again for this reaction. Now let's come back. Remember, when we broke, at this stage, we broke the 6-carbon molecule into 2 3-carbon molecules. One of them stayed in the cycle, eventually got rearranged and made back into the 5-carbon molecule. But what about this guy here? Well, the second carbon dioxide that comes in, not this first one, but another one that comes in and goes through this, that is going to give us another 3-carbon molecule. And now that we have 2 of them, we are going to reform them. We're going to break and rearrange their bonds until we get our glucose molecule. So the glucose can now be sent out of the chloroplast and to the mitochondria where it does the cellular respiration reaction. All right, so I know there's a lot going on there, at least for my class as of right now, my regular bio class, my 9th grade bio class. You don't need to know this much detail, but I at least wanted to let you know what's going on and also give you some kind of foundational knowledge should you go on to AP Bio or anything like that. All right, so in summary, here is our chloroplast, here is the granum made from the stacks or the individual thylakoid discs. And then I'm just going to draw some things and then we're going to label them, all right? That's a little hard to see, I'm sorry. All right. So again, this is the chloroplast. This is thylakoid. And here is the stroma. So this is a really good summary picture of what's going on in photosynthesis. So we have light coming in. We also have water entering the thylakoid. So water enters the thylakoid, light begins the reaction, and specifically the light dependent reaction. And that gives us a couple products. Oxygen gas, which is going to be a waste product and given off, as well as we have ATP created here. We also have NADPH created. Those are going to go to the next step, the Kelvin cycle. And what we have going on here is carbon dioxide enters it with the energy from ATP and the electrons from NADPH. It's able to make glucose. Now, since we use the energy from ATP, it becomes ADP plus another phosphate and NADP plus hydrogen. And those are going to go back to the thylakoid. That's the cool thing about these reactions. A lot of the different components are recycled. The ADP and the phosphate go back here. They get charged again. They rebond. They form ATP, which goes back to the Kelvin cycle, uses the energy, and goes back to get recharged. NADP plus and the hydrogen are at the thylakoid. They pick up the electrons from the electron transport chain, become NADPH, go to the Kelvin cycle, give the electrons to the different molecules, becoming NADP plus and 8 hydrogen plus again, come back here, pick up more electrons. Now you see why I call them an electron taxi. So this is a good summary of photosynthesis. Anyways, I know that was kind of a long one. I'm sorry. There's a lot going on in this reaction, but I hope it was useful. I hope it was informative. And just stay awesome, you guys. Stay curious, and I'll talk to you later. All right, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.